I've always been the one who keeps everything under control, practical, reliable, with a clear outlook on life, especially compared to my older brother Bart, who always dreamed of something big, bright, unpredictable. He was chasing his dreams, trying to build a business, build something meaningful, while I, step by step, stubbornly climbed the career ladder, not allowing myself the luxury of disappointment or failure. I lived according to a clearly defined plan, and, frankly, this plan finally began to bear fruit. I got a job at Crawford & Associates, a prestigious, respected company, with such a salary that my previous position began to seem like just a student part-time job. Of course, everything in life has its price. For me, it was the road, 2 hours there, 2 back, 4 hours a day, erasing from life not only morning and evening hours, but also strength, and mood, and, it seems, even a part of myself. After just 2 weeks, waking up at 5 in the morning and returning home after 9 at night, I realized that this could not go on any longer. I literally felt like the road was killing me, and not in a figurative sense. I had to find a new place to live closer to the office. This became my priority. That Saturday, as always, I went to my parents for dinner, a tradition we had followed since childhood. The house smelled of fried onions, rosemary, and something else, warm, familiar, almost calming. Mom was busy in the kitchen, stirring something aromatic, as if it had come from the pages of the family cookbook, which she never wrote, but knew by heart. Dad was sitting in his usual chair, rocking slightly, a newspaper in his hands, glasses on the tip of his nose, everything as it was when I was 10, 15, 20. "How are things at the new job?" Mom asked, putting a casserole on the table, from which steam rose, as if from childhood. "Very well, actually," I answered, lying almost automatically, helping her set out the plates. I didn't want to worry her. Everything was fine, except for one small detail. "The only problem is the road. I'm looking for something closer to the office, an apartment to rent." Before I could finish speaking, I caught a glance at myself. The same quiet, silent, slightly ironic one that my parents always exchanged when they were about to voice something important, or, as in this case, useful. 30 years of marriage had made them almost telepathic. Mom wiped her hands on her apron, sat down opposite me, and said with some unexpected delicacy, "You know, Amber, we might have a solution for you. Remember Grandma Helen's old apartment? The one I inherited. Our tenants moved out last week, and it's only a 5-minute walk from your office." I almost dropped my fork. Of course I remembered that apartment. God, how I remembered it. I spent every summer there, every school holiday. It was a 2-room apartment in a quiet area, with high windows from which Grandma Helen, rolling up her sleeves, watered her flowers, petunias. She adored petunias. She even had little pots with tags on which the name of each variety was handwritten. And the balcony, small, but so cozy, it was like a miniature garden in the very center of the city. "How much will the rent be?" I asked, trying not to show how quickly my heart was beating with excitement. Mom named the amount. I swallowed. It was almost a miracle. The price was 1.5 times lower than the market average. "Of course, we will give you a family discount," she added with a kind, slightly sly smile. "I will take it," I said without hesitation. There was no point in thinking. The location is perfect, the price is a gift, everything coincided. Dad finally looked up from his newspaper. "Have you heard about Bart's success?" He began with the same enthusiasm with which he had been telling about his brother's latest adventure for years. "He just landed 3 corporate clients. His courier company is on the rise. He's a real star." And that was it. The conversation slipped into a channel that was painfully familiar. Bart's achievements, his courage, his bravery, his leap upward. I sat at the table, nodding at the right moments, scrolling through the food on my plate, and in my mind I seemed to distance myself from the whole picture. Not because I was jealous, no, I just felt like I was invited to a celebration where you are not the hero of the occasion, but the neighbor who got the edge of the table. It was always like that. Bart is the golden child, the dreamer, the risk-taker with big ideas, and me? Well, I was just Amber. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! The day of moving came almost suddenly. In the hustle and bustle of workdays and evening preparations, I did not notice how it crept up on me. When I entered Grandma Helen's apartment with the first box in my hands, I immediately felt, "I'm home." But joy gave way to amazement. The apartment, it was not at all as I remembered it. The walls were covered with old wallpaper, which was swollen and peeling off at the corners. As if tired of holding on, there were stains on the ceiling, mysterious, as if there was a story that I had yet to unravel. And in the middle of the room stood a single piece of furniture, an old sofa, gray, sagging, worn out, as if it had been a silent witness to all the changes that had taken place here over the years. That evening, tired, but somehow still happy, I sank down on that same old sofa, the only place in this apartment where I could sit with my legs crossed, as I often did as a child, when I read books on that same spot, next to my grandmother's sewing box and her knitting needles, which quietly tapped in her thin but surprisingly strong hands. I held the phone in my hand, hesitantly looking at the screen before dialing my mother's number, and when she answered, a familiar voice from the TV was heard in the background, one of those endless cooking shows that she liked to play in the background while she did her chores. "Hey, Mom," I said, settling myself more comfortably, "do you mind if I do some redecorating?" She said absently, clearly absorbed in the screen, and then, remembering who she was talking to, added, "Oh, sure, darling, just don't make it too bright. You know how I feel about those trendy neon colors everyone's using these days." I chuckled, shaking my head at the peeling wall opposite. "Mom, have you ever seen me in anything brighter than navy blue? Trust me, I think more about earth tones, neutrals. It'll be calm, cozy, like a cup of cocoa on a rainy day." That night, I dove headfirst into the internet, Pinterest, design blogs, inspiration boards. They all became my world. I created a mood board with shades of warm gray, soft beige, and the occasional rich blue, like the one Grandma Helen wore when she put on her best dressing gown for Sunday dinner. Everything will be restrained but elegant, comfortable but organized, a reflection of myself, my desire to create a space in which you can not only live, but breathe deeply. The next few months flew by in a blur: work, office, reports, meetings, and then home, where I changed into old, paint-stained clothes, rolled up my sleeves and got to work on the walls, the floor, the windows, first, removing the wallpaper, which fell on my shoulders like flakes of dust and memories, then painting, which, as it turned out, requires not one, but 3 or 4 layers, patience and the ability to make even strokes. I cursed myself, the rollers, the corners, but I continued. Anyway, furniture shopping became my new Saturday hobby. I walked around the shops for hours, sat down on each sofa, closing my eyes to see if I could doze off on it on a Friday evening after a long week. I measured the space, took notes on my phone, compared prices, and slowly, piece by piece, built my little home: a cozy gray sectional sofa to stretch out my feet on and watch old movies, a dining table for 6, made of warm, solid wood, like an invitation to long dinners with friends, of whom I never had many, but with whom every meeting was a holiday, a soft, warm rug that tied everything together and added coziness even on a cloudy day. It took half a year of weekends and evenings, but one day I stood in the middle of the living room, looked around, and felt such a surge of pride, such a living current in my chest, that my eyes filled with tears. I did it, with my own hands, without anyone's help, me, Amber, just Amber. When my mother came to see the result, I felt the way, perhaps, children feel at their first school play. She walked slowly, touching the new kitchen countertops, examining the lamps, stopping at the bedroom, running her hand over the wallpaper with a thin, barely noticeable pattern, as if appraising the fabric of an expensive dress. "Amber," she said, finally turning to me, "this is wonderful." I almost fell over. Mom rarely gave compliments, especially to me, but she smiled. "Really? Actually, I'm impressed. You did all this yourself?" I nodded, trying to look modest, although inside I was bursting with joy. "The YouTube tutorials really helped," I added, shrugging. "That's great," she said, and then she did something she hadn't done for many years. She came up and hugged me, for real, tightly, with the warmth that people hug not out of politeness, but because they can't help it, and despite my adulthood, my new apartment and position, I felt like a child who was finally seen. 2 weeks passed. I was driving to a family dinner again, almost jumping with excitement. This time I had my own news. I had been promoted. I became a senior account manager. My salary had increased. I had a team I couldn't wait to share. At dinner, when the conversation died down, I looked at my parents and said, "Mom, Dad, I have good news. I got a promotion at work." Mom barely looked up from her plate. "That's sweet, honey," she said, turning to Dad. "Have you heard from Bart today?" And that's when the real talk began. It turned out that Bart was in trouble. The courier company was under pressure. A bigger competitor had entered the market, a national chain with convenient apps and prices that were impossible to beat. Customers were leaving. One by one, the ship was sinking. "We'll help him," Dad said, pushing his plate away. "We decided to take out a loan." I almost choked on my water, a lonely glance in my direction. "Maybe," I said, trying to sound calm, "maybe this is a chance, an opportunity. If he can't compete with this company, maybe he should start something new? Something different?" The silence was almost physical. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, but it wasn't the soft, warm look they gave each other. It was a different look, the look they always gave me when I said something they didn't want to hear, the look that said, "We're disappointed in you again, you don't understand business, Amber," Dad finally said, his voice changing, hard, with that special intonation I remembered from my teenage years, when he tried to fit my feelings into a framework of logic and stubborn rationality that left no room for doubt. "You've always played it safe with your office job," he continued, "as if I hadn't made dozens of personal sacrifices for stability, as if my career was something that happened by chance and not the result of years of intense, exhausting, and, yes, selfless work. Your brother is an entrepreneur, he takes risks, family helps family," Mom finished, firmly, almost ceremoniously, as if she were passing judgment, as if each word were a stitch she was sewing up. The cracks in her picture of a perfect family, "That's what we do." I opened my mouth to argue, to explain, to remind, to say something, anything that might awaken in them some glimmer of understanding, but instead of words, only a quiet exhalation came out, and I immediately closed my mouth, because what was the point? They had already decided everything, everything had always been decided for me. I could say I had found a cure for cancer, and they would still be more worried about how Bart was doing with the vans. They would wish I had put my discovery to work on the family business. The next 6 months passed like watching a car crash in slow motion. Every week, a new twist, a new blow, a new casualty report. Mom would call from time to time, casually, between recipes and the weather, telling me about Bart's business, even though I had never asked. The loan they had taken out had gone towards new vans. Helped him lower his prices a little, but that, of course, wasn't enough. All they were doing was patching up a hole in an already sinking ship. The competitor was expanding, ruthlessly, efficiently, technologically. It had a fancy app, a beautiful interface, and most importantly, a promise of next-day delivery that customers simply couldn't refuse. And then, one day, the very call I had been waiting for all this time rang. Mom said it in a tense, almost trembling with excitement voice. "Your brother's company went bankrupt." I silently pressed the phone to my ear, feeling a warm, bitter heaviness spreading in my chest. "He and Sarah are moving in with us temporarily until they get back on their feet," she added, as if it were a given. I clutched the phone tighter, remembering my prediction over that fateful dinner 6 months ago. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, because, well, what else can I say? That I warned you? That I knew? That you didn't listen? "They're sleeping in your old room," Mom continued, and I immediately imagined Sarah, all in silks and perfume, lying on the very bedspread I'd picked out in college. "Sarah's taking it really hard, you know how she feels about her appearance, right?" Mom's voice became quieter, almost a whisper. "Yes, I knew it. Oh, how I knew it. Sarah was always special." She looked at my simple office job with the same derision that someone might look at rubber slippers at a cocktail party. At every family gathering, she never missed an opportunity to remind me that she was married to a CEO. CEO, how she loved that phrase. I couldn't help but wonder how she was coping now that her glossy magazine had temporarily moved to my parents' house, where the walls still smelled of antiquity, and every morning began not with a cappuccino in a trendy cafe, but with the clink of dishes in my mother's hands. That weekend, I went to my parents', convincing myself that it was just another family dinner, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, I realized that I was wrong. The air was taut as a string, tension hung everywhere. It was in my mother's too cheerful voice, in the silence of the TV that usually played in the background, in the dull clatter of footsteps. Bart was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his posture the picture of tired frustration and mild annoyance. He didn't even look up when I entered, just a quick grunt that was somewhere between hey and well, you're here. Sarah was sitting in her chair, like a queen on a throne, her back straight, her face still, her designer handbag neatly at her feet, a symbol of another life, lost but not forgotten. She gave me one of those looks that sent a chill down my spine, a look as if she'd just discovered me stuck to the soles of her shoes. Mom called everyone in for dinner, and we gathered around the table. I should have known better than to hope for a quiet evening, but alas, hope is for the naive. Bart, without waiting for me to pick up my fork, began to speak. His voice was too loud, his words too smooth, as if he'd rehearsed the speech in front of a mirror. I had it all under control, he insisted, gesturing with his knife. We were growing, we were expanding, and then those corporate vultures with their fancy technology and deep pockets. They probably spent millions on marketing, Sarah put in, idly shuffling food around her plate. How can a small business compete with that? Bart slammed the table, the glasses shook, the water in them trembling like my nerves. They're just hooligans with big budgets, he barked, and don't get me started on those idiots at the bank. Those idiots wouldn't even extend our line of credit, complete idiots. They wouldn't recognize a good business opportunity if it bit them. Maybe, I said, unable to contain myself, maybe that's how business works. Competition is part of the game. You have to plan for these opportunities when you start a company. And the silence that followed was so complete, so thick, you could cut it with a knife. A pair of eyes turned to me at once, Bart's eyes, Sarah's eyes, my parents' eyes, all looking at me as if I'd just suggested that everyone eat rocks for breakfast. What do you have to say from your comfortable office job? Bart drawled, smearing food on his plate as if it weren't food but the remnants of his ambitions, and his voice was filled with all the pent-up irritation with which he had looked at my stability for years, as if it were a reproach to his own instability. What do you know about running a real business? I had just started to open my mouth to respond, not to the reproach, but simply to the injustice, but my father's warning glance made me shut up immediately. He didn't say a word, but that wasn't necessary. The barely noticeable tension in his jaw, the slight tilt of his head, and that same look that always meant, stop, Amber, you're going too far, don't ruin the evening. I concentrated on my plate, not because I was hungry, but because it was the only one at that moment that didn't demand explanations, support, or understanding from me. I put the peas in neat rows, trying not to meet anyone's gaze at the table, and only the silence that hung over us seemed alive, as if it, too, understood that something bad was coming. I can't live here anymore, Sarah said suddenly, without looking up from her plate, her voice dripping with discontent, wrapped in a thin layer of false politeness. No offense, she added immediately, not at all regretting what she said, but I need my own personal space. As if on cue, as if someone had pulled a string, Bart suddenly perked up. Hey, Mom, what about Grandma Helen's old place? It's still yours, right? My head snapped up so fast it made me dizzy for a moment. I live there, I said sharply, almost defiantly, and I completely renovated it. Oh, yeah, Mom nodded, and her voice, which had sounded dull and tired until then, suddenly became animated. Amber did a wonderful job on the place, it looks absolutely beautiful now. I saw the look Bart and Sarah exchanged. It was quick, fleeting, but full of meaning, calculated, meaningful. Something cold pierced my stomach, like thin ice cracking inside, but I pushed the feeling away, told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was impossible. They wouldn't, really? I was walking home from work on Wednesday night, tired but looking forward to it, leftover pasta in the fridge, a blanket, the couch, and a new Netflix show I'd been saving like a little present to myself for the week. But when I got to my floor, I froze. There were voices coming from behind my door, not just voices, but familiar voices. I inserted my key, opened the door, and there they were, Mom, Bart, Sarah. They were standing in my living room, mine, as if it were their own space. Sarah ran her hand over the new curtains I'd hung just a month ago. Mom, I began, trying to keep my composure. I was trying to keep my boy steady. Calm down, what's going on? You could have at least called. Mom waved her hand as if I'd just suggested something ridiculous. Don't be silly, Amber, this is my apartment, I don't need permission to visit. My mouth went dry, my mother's tone was cold, distant, authoritative. I watched Sarah continue her tour of my apartment, my work, my labor, my life, as if she were a real estate agent evaluating a potential investment. She ran her fingers along the new kitchen counter, peered into the bathroom, where the walls still smelled of fresh paint, and nodded approvingly at the built-in shelves in the living room that I'd painstakingly installed in the evenings after work. Then she sat down on the old sofa, the one that had survived the entire renovation, and leaned back and smiled, that creamy, measured, almost cat-like smile of hers. "This is perfect, we can move in next week." The world reeled. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but I live here, this is my house, I renovated it, I own it, I decide who lives here," Mom interrupted sharply, her voice suddenly steely. "But," I gestured at the walls, as if they could bear witness to the truth, "all the work I've done. I painted the floors, I repaired the tiles piece by piece, I spent nights learning how to solder wires to replace the lights, I—" "Oh, yes," Mom interrupted, and her smile became strange, calculating, "in fact, because you've improved the apartment so much. The market value has increased significantly, so if you want to stay, the new rent will be 3 times what you're paying now." The blood drained from my face, it all clicked into place. This had been planned. Mom knew, she knew I couldn't afford the rent, my raise was good, but not that good. I looked at them all, my family, the people I loved, the people I trusted. "Are you trying to throw me out?" I whispered, not recognizing my own voice. Mom shrugged, without regret, without hesitation. "If you can't afford the new rent, you should probably start looking for another place, you have a week to move out." And without waiting for words or objections, they headed for the door. Sarah was already on the phone, her tone light and businesslike, as if she were making a restaurant reservation. Apparently, she was already making plans to move. Bart hadn't said a word the entire time, and frankly, he hadn't needed to. His silence, as always, was a convenient backdrop to other people's decisions, because one glance, one raised eyebrow from Mom, was enough for him to follow the path planned for him without thinking. Even if he had to step over me along the way. Mom froze in the doorway, as if she wanted to say something else, as if somewhere deep inside her there was still a glimmer of doubt or, perhaps, a rhetorical attempt to justify her own betrayal. But she didn't turn around. A second later, she said a short, cutting, "in a week," and slammed the door behind them, leaving behind only the smell of her perfume and the feeling that the air had become thicker and heavier. I stood in the middle of my living room, where I had invested more than just money, myself, my love for detail, my fatigue, my overtime, my late-night trips to get the right shade of paint, that energy that you can't see but that makes a place a home. I looked at the walls I had painted myself, at the corners where I had driven nails to hang pictures, and I felt the warmth I had felt so proudly showing my mother, the result of my labor just a few months ago, now crumbling to ashes right in my mouth, turning into a taste of bitterness and betrayal, while my family probably expected me to spend the evening with my face buried in a pillow, sobbing from resentment and helplessness. But instead, by midnight, I was already sitting on the floor, cross-legged, with my phone in my hands, looking at rental ads, scrolling through photos, comparing prices, analyzing locations. I had found the perfect place, a modern studio apartment just 2 blocks from my office. It was bright, with large windows, neutral walls, and new laminate flooring. The rent was higher than I was paying my mom, but I didn't care, not out of stubbornness, but because the price of independence had finally become clear, and I was willing to pay it. I called work first thing Thursday morning, lying about being sick for the first time in 3 years. By 9 o'clock, I was settled into my new apartment. I signed the lease, put down a deposit, and shook hands with the landlord, a woman named Janet with her hair up and a stern but penetrating gaze. She raised an eyebrow when I asked if I could move in immediately, but she just nodded and wished me luck. Next stop, a moving company. I found one that specialized in urgent moves, didn't skimp on the speed, and while they were on their way, I walked around my apartment, no, not mine, my mother's, and put stickers on everything that had been bought with my own money. I did it without malice, calmly, like an accountant reconciling accounts, like a person who no longer has anything to prove. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the movers were already standing at the threshold, and I, like a conductor, directed their movements. The gray sectional sofa is mine, the dining table and chairs are mine, the kitchen appliances, except for the built-in stove and refrigerator, are mine. These bookshelves, which I installed with curses and smoke breaks, themselves, by hand, mine too, piece by piece. The room began to disintegrate into boxes. The coffee maker I bought when I got a promotion, because I felt I deserved some real coffee in the morning. The memory foam mattress I bought on Black Friday after a sleepless night on an old one that had sunk to the springs. The TV I installed myself after watching 3 YouTube tutorials because I didn't want to ask anyone for help. Everything I'd put into making this place cozy was carefully packed, moved, and loaded into the truck. When the move was complete, the apartment looked almost exactly the same as the day I'd first walked in, only the walls felt a little emptier, the floors a little more echoey, and the couch, the only thing left in the middle of the living room, felt like a lone captain going down with his ship. I took one last look around, letting my eyes linger on every corner, every crack I'd filled, every wall I'd painted until midnight, dreaming of how cozy it would be. Then I locked the door, put the keys in an envelope, and slid it under the door of my parents' house on my way to my new apartment, without looking back, without hesitation, without regret. All night I arranged the furniture, unwrapped the boxes, matched the pillows to the couch, arranged everything until the space felt right, mine, without the ghosts of family expectations, without the obligatory gazes, without other people's decisions. But the real storm began the next morning. At exactly 7 o'clock, the phone began to shake, jumping on the new kitchen counter, as if it were trying to escape the voices that were coming from the speaker. Mom, Bart, Sarah, Mom again, then Bart again, ring after ring. I took a slow sip of the coffee I had just made in my coffee maker, in my apartment, looking at the phone without rushing. On the 6th ring, I picked up the receiver. How dare you? Mom's voice exploded, sounding like a thundercloud from the speaker. The apartment is completely empty. Your brother and Sarah have nowhere to sleep except for this old couch. You had no right to take all this furniture. I took another sip of coffee, feeling how calmness filled me to the brim. Actually, Mom, I said evenly, I had every right. I bought all this with my own money. I have all the receipts, if you want to see them, I said, not raising my voice, but each word echoed in my chest with that special hardness that is forged not by rage and resentment, but by disappointment that has persistently displaced illusions. I left what was there originally, you know, that couch that you were so happy for me to use. There was a moment of silence, thick as before a thunderstorm, when the air becomes electric and even the birds fall silent, and then Mom said something that even Grandma Helen, calm as a Swiss watch, would have washed her mouth out with soap. The call ended with a dry, sharp click. My phone went silent, but not for long. Just 30 minutes later the screen lit up again, this time with a barrage of messages. The messaging app was almost overwhelmed by the onslaught. Bart and Sarah, as always, acting as a united front. You are a vengeful witch, came the first from Sarah. How dare you take everything? You are just jealous, because Bart is a real entrepreneur and you are just a piece of paper. Then came the messages from Bart. You are selfish, you have always been jealous of my success, now you are just trying to punish us because we are going through a hard time. A real cool sister, a real cool one. Their words poured out like acid, each message a tiny prick in the skin, designed not to hurt but to wear down. I scrolled through them one by one, watching their image of me form. I was greedy, heartless, vindictive, petty, cruel, selfish, and my personal favorite was a soulless corporate drone who wouldn't know family loyalty if she was bitten in the face. I read each message once, not twice, not with an explanation, not with a response. I just closed the app, put the phone face down, and let myself exhale. I wasn't going to drown in their drama. Instead, I threw myself into the arrangement of my new apartment, continuing to arrange furniture, hang curtains, glue hooks and frames, match candles to the color of the sofa, and allow myself, perhaps for the first time in a long time, to build not just a house, but a new life. A month passed, without any contact with my family. I would like to say that I did not think about them at all, that I left them behind like a faded photograph in a box, but that would be a lie. Every now and then, usually in the late afternoon, when a shadow fell on the windowsill, I caught myself thinking, how are they doing? Have they managed to furnish the apartment? Is Sarah still sleeping on that old sofa? Does my mother cook her famous lasagna for them now, as she once cooked for me? I drove these thoughts away, clenched my teeth and whispered to myself, they made their choice, and it is time for me to continue. Exactly a month after the move, the phone lit up again, The name Mom lit up the screen like a red light on an airplane. I almost didn't answer. Almost, but something, maybe a lingering hope, maybe a pull of my blood, made me press the accept button. The red payment didn't come, she said, without greeting or politeness, as if she were continuing a conversation we'd never started. Her voice was accusatory, cold, hurt. I couldn't help myself. I laughed, not because it was funny, the laughter just came out of nowhere, like a last resort. Of course it didn't, I don't live there anymore, remember? You kicked me out. That's not the point, Mom snapped. We expect you to keep paying. We're going through a really tough time right now, Amber. We're still paying off the loan we took out for Bart's business, and he can't afford to pay rent right now. The family needs your help. I felt my grip on the phone tighten, the muscles in my fingers tightening with surprise and slowly building anger. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. You kicked me out of the apartment so Bart and Sarah could move in, and now you want me to keep paying rent on an apartment I don't live in, so they can live there for free. Family helps family, Mom repeated, as if it were a universal spell that could justify everything from betrayal to moral bankruptcy. You know, we're struggling with our mortgage payments, and Bart's still trying to get back on his feet. How many times had I heard that phrase over the past 20 years? Bart's still trying to get back on his feet, always when he needed something from me, when he was failing over and over again, and I had to support him, understand him, give in, never when I was having a hard time, never when I needed support. Something inside me finally snapped, quietly, but irreversibly. Actually, Mom, I said, and was surprised at how even and quiet my voice was, as if it had been filtered by the years I'd lived through. What does a family do? A family kicks one child out onto the street to make room for another? Family takes away someone's house and then demands that they continue to pay for it? I asked, and there was no hysteria or angst in my voice, just a calm, almost cold awareness of how long I had been looking away from the obvious. You're being dramatic, Mom breathed, and those two words had it all: protection, a habitual defensive posture, an attempt to make me wrong again. No, Mom, I answered calmly but firmly, I'm realistic. For the first time in my life, I see things as they are. This attitude of yours, family helps family, well, guess what I am, too, or at least I was supposed to be. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, thick as molasses, from which there was no easy way out, and when Mom finally spoke, her voice was icy. I'm very disappointed in you, Amber. I laughed, not loudly, not maliciously, just quietly, briefly, with an almost good-natured irony. I was just about to tell you the same thing, I said, and without waiting for an answer, I ended the call. Feeling how the silence in the apartment immediately became deeper, cleaner, I immediately blocked her number, then my father's number, then Bart and Sarah's, then I opened all the messaging apps and blocked them there too, not because I was afraid of new attacks, but because for the first time in my life I chose myself. I checked all my social media accounts and added them to the blacklist, not out of anger, but out of a sense of internal hygiene. It was like cutting off a limb, painful, difficult, with a drop of guilt, but with each step it became easier to breathe, as if I had finally taken off a heavy, rain-soaked coat that I had been wearing for too long. Weeks passed, then months. There was no more contact with my family, only the occasional whispers, coming through my cousin Rachel, the only person in my family who had always been kind to me, who hadn't confused love with demand, or caring with manipulation. She'd told me, in a low-pressure tone, what was going on. Bart was apparently hatching another brilliant business idea, something like homemade pet food delivery, or perhaps an organic food subscription box. Rachel admitted she wasn't sure. There had been a lot of rumors. According to her, my parents had started going around asking relatives for money to start up, some of whom had politely declined, some of whom had said I'll think about it, but none of whom seemed ready to invest in another bubble. Only Uncle Derek, a man whose interest rates were so predatory that sharks would have had the decency to blush, had offered to help, but even my parents weren't desperate enough to accept it. The last I heard, they were thinking about taking out another loan to finance Bart's new venture. Rachel told me this one Saturday, over coffee, in that cozy corner cafe that smelled of cinnamon and caramel, and watched me carefully for my reaction. What do you think about it? She asked, tilting her head ever so slightly. I stirred my latte, thinking about how I would have answered before, 6 months ago, I would have been terribly worried, 3 months ago, I would have been angry, and now. I smiled, not from pain, not from anger, but simply from the knowledge that I was no longer in pain. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I answered, and to my own surprise, I realized that I really meant it. Rachel chuckled, set her teacup down on the saucer, and said, "You seem different, happier." I thought about my new apartment, how I had chosen every single item in it not because I had to, but because I loved it, about my recent promotion at work, which I had celebrated with my colleagues, my team, people who valued me not because of my kinship, but because they deserved me. About the cooking classes I had finally started taking on the weekends, a small dream that had been put off for years. While I helped the family, about the new acquaintances I had made, about the feeling for the first time in my life that my voice was not drowned out by the general noise. "I think I am happy," I answered. Later that evening, I sat on the couch I had moved with me, in the apartment I had made cozy, with a glass of wine in my hand, and allowed myself to look back, not with pain, but with clarity. I thought back on everything that had happened, every scene, every line, every breath. My mother's words rang in my mind, "Family helps family." They were right, family should help family, but somewhere along the way, they forgot something important. Help is not a one-way street, love is not conditional, tied to expectations or convenience, and family is not about supporting someone's failures at the expense of someone's growth. It's about being there when needed, sincerely, humanly. I took another sip of wine and smiled. I had better things to do than try to fix people who don't want to be fixed, much better things, in fact.